The wind sliced across Sigrun Eiríksdóttir's face like invisible blades as she crawled through the bitter snow, her exhausted body and near-frozen fingers fighting against the merciless cold. Behind her, flames still consumed what remained of the village, the acrid stench of destruction mingling with the grave-like silence of night. The death of her husband, Olaf Strongarm, still burned in her chest like white-hot iron. Now only flight remained, and the silent promise of vengeance. But first, survival. On the horizon, a solitary figure stood out against the darkness. A man seated beside a modest fire, his hand gripping a runic drum. Sigrun swallowed her fear and approached. Would she find refuge there, or doom? 24 hours earlier, Sigrun had awakened beneath the weight of a Nordic winter already announcing its merciless arrival. The first light of dawn barely penetrated the smoke hole of her dwelling, casting weak shadows across the sleeping forms of her children, Leif, 10 winters old, and little Astrid, just 5. Fjalheim, their village, nestled between frozen mountains and ice-laden pines, seemed a place apart from the world. But Sigrun's soul was far from peace. She rose silently, careful not to disturb the children as she stoked the embers in the central hearth. The coals glowed orange in the gloom, small islands of warmth in a sea of cold. As she added kindling, memories of Olaf flooded back. His laughter, his strength, the way his arms had encircled her on nights like this, when the cold seemed determined to claim them all. 3 winters had passed since raiders had taken him, yet the wound remained fresh, like a blade that never dulled. "Mother?" Leif's voice, still thick with sleep, came from beneath his furs. "Is it morning already?" "Rest longer," she whispered, her breath visible in the chill air. "The sun barely touches the mountains." The boy nodded and burrowed deeper into his bedding. Sigrun watched him, Olaf's son, with his father's stubborn chin and watchful eyes. At 10, he already carried himself with the gravity of a man who understood loss. Too young for such knowledge, she thought, yet this was the way of their world. The cold made the cabin's boards creak like an old longship at sea. The smell of smoke from the hearth mingled with the aroma of dried meat hanging from the rafters, provisions that seemed increasingly meager as winter tightened its grip. Outside, the wind howled, announcing that nothing would come easily in the months ahead. Sigrun dressed methodically, each layer a defense against the killing cold. First the woolen undertunic, then the thicker overgown, leather trousers worn soft from years of use. Finally, she wrapped herself in the thick wolf-pelt cloak that Olaf had given her on their last summer together. Its weight across her shoulders was both burden and comfort, like the memory of him she carried. She tightened her belt, from which hung a small knife, not a warrior's weapon, but a woman's tool for the daily tasks of survival. Her hair, dark as raven's wings, she braided quickly and efficiently, her fingers moving from memory through the familiar pattern. In the dim light, the thin scar on the left side of her neck was barely visible. A reminder of the night raiders had come, when she'd fought to protect her children with nothing but kitchen implements and raw fury. "Astrid," she murmured, gently rousing her daughter. "Come, little one, we must start our day." The child's eyes, green as summer leaves, Sigrun's eyes, opened reluctantly. "The cold, mother." "Then we must bite back," Sigrun replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was what Olaf would have said. As Sigrun prepared the morning meal, thin porridge stretched with the last of their dried berries, she mentally catalogued the day's necessary tasks. Fetch more firewood, check the snares she'd set at the forest's edge, mend Leif's torn tunic, and speak with Hilda, the healer, about Astrid's persistent cough. Ordinary concerns that kept her mind from dwelling on the extraordinary threat growing on their borders. For the tension mounting in the village came not from winter alone, but from rumors that Ulfric Gudmundsson, chieftain of the rival clan beyond the eastern ridge, advanced with his warriors, seeking retribution for his brother's death, an ancestral conflict that threatened to consume everything in its path. 3 nights past, scouts had reported seeing Ulfric's men moving through the high passes, despite the snow. Such determination spoke of rage beyond reason. "Will there be fighting, mother?" Leif asked suddenly, his young face serious as he spooned the last of his porridge. Sigrun hesitated. The boy deserved truth, yet she wished to preserve what childhood remained to him. "The elders are meeting today. They will decide how to answer Ulfric's claims." "If father were here—" "But he is not," she cut him off, more sharply than intended. Softening her tone, she added, "And so we must be strong in his place." After breakfast, Sigrun bundled Astrid off to stay with Helga, a grandmother whose own grandchildren had grown. Leif went to help Gunnar the blacksmith, learning to work metal as his father had once done. These arrangements made, Sigrun took her axe, small but sharp, and headed toward the forest to collect the day's wood. The sky hung low and gray above Fjalheim, the air so cold it hurt to breathe deeply. Smoke rose from the scattered dwellings, each family huddled against the winter's assault. As Sigrun passed through the village, she noted the worried glances, the hushed conversations that ceased at her approach. Word of Ulfric's advance had spread, along with an unspoken question: would Fjalheim sacrifice one family to appease the rival clan's thirst for vengeance? For it was Olaf who had killed Ulfric's brother in fair combat years ago, a matter of honor settled by steel, or so they had all believed. But old wounds festered in Ulfric's heart, turning grief to hatred that wouldn't be quenched by reason or time. "Sigrun," called Bjorn, one of the village elders, as she passed his dwelling. "The council meets at midday. You should be present." She nodded, her face betraying nothing of the dread that coiled in her stomach. "I will return by then." The forest welcomed her with silence, the snow muffling her footsteps as she moved between the ancient pines. Here, away from watchful eyes, Sigrun allowed her shoulders to slump, her face to show the weariness that consumed her. She leaned against a snow-laden trunk, the rough bark pressing through her cloak, and gazed upward at the canopy of interlaced branches. A prayer formed on her lips, not to the white Christ that missionaries sometimes spoke of, but to the old gods. Freya, protector of women, Thor, master of storms and strength. "Grant me courage," she whispered, her words forming small clouds in the freezing air. "Grant me wisdom to keep my children safe." She worked methodically, gathering fallen branches and using her axe to cut smaller pieces from dead wood. Each swing released a small measure of the fear and anger she couldn't otherwise express. The physical labor warmed her, despite the cold that made her fingers clumsy within her hide gloves. It was as she was binding her collected wood with a length of rope that Sigrun heard it, a sound so faint she thought at first it might be the wind playing tricks. She stilled, head tilted, listening. There it came again, a muffled cry, like that of a wounded animal, or a child. Leaving her bundled wood, Sigrun moved cautiously toward the sound, her hand instinctively finding the hilt of her small knife. The cry led her deeper into the forest, away from the well-worn path back to the village. As she pushed aside a low-hanging pine bough, she saw him, A small figure huddled at the base of a massive tree, nearly invisible against the snow, save for the slight movement of breathing. A boy, no more than 8 winters old, curled into himself like a wounded fox. His clothing, what little he wore, hung in tatters, barely offering protection against the killing cold. His hair, matted with ice and dirt, was pale as moonlight on snow. When he raised his head at her approach, Sigrun's breath caught in her throat. His eyes, a blue so deep they seemed almost black in the forest's gloom, were wide with terror and exhaustion. But it was the embroidered pattern on the remnants of his tunic that made Sigrun's blood run cold, the distinctive knotwork of Ulfric's clan. This was no ordinary lost child. This was prey, and she the hunter who had found him. The boy tried to scramble backward at the sight of her, but weakness betrayed him. He collapsed against the tree trunk, his thin chest heaving with effort and fear. A whimper escaped his blue-tinged lips. "Please," he whispered, in a voice so fragile it might have been the wind, "don't kill me." Sigrun stood frozen, the implications cascading through her mind like an avalanche. This child belonged to the enemy, moving against her village. Taking him in would be seen as theft at best, an act of war at worst. Abandoning him meant certain death by exposure or wolves, a cruelty she wasn't sure she could bear, even against her enemies. The boy's eyes never left her face as these thoughts warred within her. In them she saw not the hatred of Ulfric's clan, but the same terror she had seen in Life's eyes the night raiders had come, the universal fear of a child confronting mortality. "What is your name, boy?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. He swallowed hard before answering. "Eric, son of Gorm." His voice was barely audible over the wind's low moan through the pines. Sigrun's mind raced. Gorm had been one of Ulfric's most trusted men, a warrior known for his brutality in battle. If this was his son, the boy would be valuable indeed, perhaps even a bargaining piece in the coming conflict. But using a child as a shield or hostage? The thought turned her stomach. "Are you alone, Eric, son of Gorm?" she asked, scanning the forest for signs of pursuit or ambush. He nodded weakly. "They left me, said I was too slow, that the wolves would have me." A single tear traced a path down his dirt-smudged cheek. Father didn't stop them. The cruelty of it struck Sigrun like a physical blow. To abandon a child to the winter's mercy, even the most hardened warrior among her people would consider such an act dishonorable. In that moment, her decision crystallized like ice on still water. "Can you stand?" she asked, already moving toward him. The boy tried, his thin legs trembling with the effort, but collapsed back into the snow. Without further hesitation, Sigrun knelt and gathered him into her arms. He weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bones wrapped in rags, burning with cold, yet somehow still alive. As she lifted him, something slipped from beneath his tattered clothing, a small wooden tablet hung from a leather cord around his neck. Carved into it was a rune that Sigrun recognized as belonging to Ulfric's clan, but something about the symbol seemed different, less hostile, almost a silent plea for redemption. The boy clutched at it weakly. "My mother gave it to me," he whispered, "before she died." The internal struggle between Viking honor to protect the vulnerable and the brutal instinct for survival tore at Sigrun's heart. To help this child was to risk everything, her own children's safety, her standing in the village, perhaps even Fjalheim itself. Yet to abandon him would be to become what she hated most about her enemies. With tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, Sigrun wrapped Eirik in her wolf-pelt cloak and cradled him against her chest. "Hold tight," she murmured. "The village is not far." As she retraced her steps, the bundle of firewood lay forgotten in the snow, a small sacrifice compared to what might come. Each step toward Fjalheim felt heavier than the last, the weight of her decision pressing down upon her shoulders more than the child in her arms. "Why?" the boy mumbled against her shoulder, his voice fading as exhaustion claimed him. "Why help me?" Sigrun had no answer that would make sense to either of them. Instead, she tightened her grip and quickened her pace as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, obscuring their tracks and perhaps buying them a little more time before the storm that was surely coming, both from the sky and from those who would condemn her choice. At the edge of the forest, Sigrun paused, surveying the village below. Smoke rose from the longhouses. People moved between buildings like ants. Ordinary life continuing, unaware that she was about to cast a stone into their pond. She shifted Eirik's weight in her arms, feeling his shallow breathing against her neck. "We are almost there," she whispered, though he had fallen into the deep sleep of the utterly exhausted. "Hold on, little one." Inside her cabin, the fire had burned low, the interior dim and colder than when she'd left. Sigrun laid Eirik gently on the sleeping bench nearest the hearth and hurried to build up the flames. As warmth gradually returned to the single room, she turned her attention to the boy. His breathing was fragile, labored, like the flutter of a wounded bird. Sigrun removed his frozen, tattered clothing with careful hands, wincing at the bruises that marked his thin body, evidence of mistreatment that preceded his abandonment. She wrapped him in Olaf's smallest tunic and a fur from her own bed, then set water to warm over the rekindled fire. When the water was ready, she bathed his face and hands, noting how the dirt gave way to reveal skin almost translucent with cold and malnutrition. His hair, freed from ice and filth, was the color of pale wheat in summer, a stark contrast to her own dark locks. As she worked, Sigrun hummed softly, an old lullaby she sang to Astrid when nightmares came. Eirik's eyes fluttered open at the sound, focusing slowly on her face. Fear flickered across his features before confusion replaced it. "Am I dead?" he asked, voice cracked and dry. "Is this Valhalla?" Despite everything, Sigrun found herself smiling. "No, child, this is just a poor widow's hut in Fjalheim, and I am just Sigrun." She helped him sit up enough to drink a little of the warm broth she'd prepared, supporting his head as he sipped weakly. The wooden tablet with its carved rune still hung around his neck, and now in the firelight Sigrun could see it more clearly. The main symbol was indeed that of Ulfric's clan, but surrounding it were smaller marks, protective runes a mother might carve for a beloved child. "My mother made this," Eirik said, following her gaze to the tablet. "She said it would keep me safe when she could not." His eyes, blue as the deepest fjord, filled with tears. "But she died last winter, and Father changed." Sigrun offered him more broth, using the moment to collect her thoughts. "The men who left you in the forest, they were your father's warriors?" Eirik nodded, his thin shoulders hunching as if expecting a blow. "They said I brought shame to the clan, that I was too weak to be Gorm's son." A single tear traced down his hollow cheek. "Father watched them take me away." He didn't stop them. The cruelty of it twisted in Sigrun's gut like a knife. Even among enemies, even in times of war, children were to be protected. This was the most basic tenet of their people. That Ulfric's clan would abandon one of their own spoke of a corruption that went beyond the normal brutalities of clan rivalries. "You are safe now," she said, the words emerging before she'd fully considered their weight. But looking at the boy, this fragile, abandoned child, she knew she meant them, regardless of the cost. A sound at the door made them both start. Eirik clutched at the furs, eyes wide with renewed terror. Sigrun rose, her hand finding the hilt of her knife. But it was only Leif, returning from the blacksmith's forge. Her son stopped in the doorway, his young face registering shock at the stranger in their home. "Mother?" Uncertainty and a hint of accusation colored his voice. "Leif," Sigrun said, keeping her tone calm despite the rapid beating of her heart. "This is Eirik. He was lost in the forest. He will stay with us until he is well." Leif's gaze moved from his mother to the pale boy huddled by the fire, taking in the strange tunic, the rune tablet, the obvious signs of injury and neglect. His eyes narrowed with the quick perception of a child raised in uncertain times. "He's from Ulfric's clan," Leif said, not a question, but a statement. "I recognize the knotwork on that tablet." Sigrun didn't deny it. She had raised her son to value truth, even when it was difficult. "Yes, but he has been cast out, abandoned to die. And we will not be the kind of people who turn away a child in need, no matter whose child he may be." Leif was silent for a long moment, his young face solemn with thought. Then, to Sigrun's surprise, he approached Eirik and crouched before him. "Are you hungry?" he asked simply. "Mother makes the best fish stew in Fjalheim." The tension in Sigrun's shoulders eased slightly at her son's acceptance. Perhaps, she thought, there was hope yet. If a child could see past blood feuds to basic humanity, perhaps adults might learn to do the same. But as the day wore on, Sigrun's optimism waned. Word of the strange boy spread through Fjalheim like fire through dry timber. Voices whispered of betrayal, fear, and hatred in the spaces between houses. Hunters from the village began to circle her cabin, and the looks from former friends weighed like stones on Sigrun's soul. By midday, when she should have been at the council meeting, a crowd had gathered outside her door. At their head stood Torsten, the village headman, a fair leader in peaceful times, but a cautious one when danger threatened. "Sigrun Eirik-dottir," he called, his voice carrying the formal tone of public judgment. "Come out and explain yourself." She smoothed her tunic, touched the knife at her belt for reassurance, and stepped outside to face them. The crowd's murmuring ceased as she appeared, all eyes fixed on her, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "Is it true?" Torsten asked without preamble. "You harbor a child of Ulfric's clan beneath your roof?" Sigrun lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I harbor a child who was abandoned to die in our forest. Would you have me do otherwise?" "These are not ordinary times," said Gunnar the blacksmith, his massive arms folded across his chest. "Ulfric marches against us even now, and you bring one of them into our midst?" "I bring a child," Sigrun countered, her voice stronger than she felt. "A boy no older than your own son, Gunnar, cast out by his own people and left for the wolves." "Or sent as a spy," suggested Hilda the healer, her weathered face creased with suspicion. "A clever ruse to place eyes within our walls." The crowd murmured agreement, and Sigrun felt the ground of public opinion shifting beneath her feet like spring ice. She had known this would come, had prepared arguments in her mind, yet facing the collective fear of her community made her words seem suddenly inadequate. "The boy was half dead when I found him," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Bruised and starved. No clan sends a spy in such condition, nor a child so young. "Bring him out," Torsten ordered. "Let us see this abandoned son of our enemies." Sigrun hesitated, protective instinct warring with the knowledge that defiance would only worsen their position. "He is weak, barely able to stand." "All the more reason to question your story," called someone from the back of the crowd. "Bring him forth." With reluctance heavy in her movements, Sigrun returned to the cabin. Inside, Leif stood protectively beside Eric's sleeping form, a small knife, his father's, clutched in his hand. "They want to see him," Sigrun explained softly. "We cannot refuse Leif." "They'll hurt him," her son protested, the knife trembling slightly in his grip. Sigrun gently took the weapon from him. "No, I won't allow that, but we must show them he is no threat." She knelt beside Eirik and touched his shoulder. "Eirik, wake up, child. I need you to come outside with me for a moment." The boy's eyes opened, clouded with fever and fear. "Are they going to kill me?" The simple question, asked with the resignation of one who expected no mercy, broke something in Sigrun's heart. "No," she promised fiercely, "no one will harm you while I draw breath." She wrapped him in a blanket and lifted him into her arms. He weighed almost nothing, this child who had become the center of a brewing storm. As she carried him outside, the crowd fell silent, their collective gaze fixed on the pale, trembling boy in her arms. Eirik shrank against her, his thin arms tightening around her neck as he faced the hostile stares of strangers. The wooden tablet with its carved rune slipped from beneath the blanket, catching the winter light. "See the mark he bears," called someone. "Ulfric's sign." "A child's token," Sigrun countered, "given by his mother before she died." Torsten approached cautiously, studying Erik with narrowed eyes. The boy met his gaze with quiet dignity, despite his fear, a trait Sigrun couldn't help but admire. "What is your name, boy?" Torsten asked. "Erik Gormson," he replied, his voice barely audible. A murmur ran through the crowd at the name. Gorm was known to them all, a warrior whose brutality in battle was legendary. "And how came you to be in our forest, Erik Gormson?" Torsten continued. Erik swallowed hard before answering. "They said I brought shame to the clan, that I was too weak." His voice broke slightly. "They took me into the forest and left me there." "Who?" pressed Torsten. "My father's men, and my father." He watched. The simple statement hung in the air, its implications rippling through the crowd. Even among enemies, the abandonment of a child was considered dishonorable. Some faces in the gathering softened slightly, particularly among the women. But then a new commotion arose from the village edge. A rider approached at speed. One of their own scouts returned from watching the eastern passes. He dismounted in a flurry of snow and pushed through the crowd to Torsten's side, his face grim with urgent news. "Ulfric's men have crossed the ridge," he reported, breathless from his hard ride. "A full war party, moving fast despite the snow. They'll be here by nightfall." The crowd erupted in fearful exclamations. Amid the chaos, Torsten raised his hands for silence. "And there is more," the scout added, once the noise had subsided. "They search for something or someone. I heard them questioning a charcoal burner at the forest edge about a missing boy." All eyes turned back to Erik, who trembled visibly in Sigrun's arms. The fragile sympathy that had begun to form shattered like thin ice beneath a heavy boot. "You see," Hilda cried. "They come for him. Ulfric will destroy us all for harboring his kin." "Give the boy to them," shouted another voice. "Perhaps it will appease Ulfric's rage." "Return what is theirs," agreed Gunnar, "and they may leave us in peace." Sigrun tightened her hold on Erik, who had begun to weep silently against her shoulder. "Would you sacrifice a child to save yourselves?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic.
What honor is there in that? What honor is there in the destruction of our entire village for one boy not of our blood? Countered Thorsten, though his face showed the conflict within him. The needs of Fjolheim must come first, Sigrun. Then we are no better than those who abandoned him, she said bitterly. No better than Ulfric and his cruel men. The debate might have continued, growing more heated with each exchange, but at that moment Eric himself spoke up, his voice surprisingly steady despite his tears. "I will go," he said, pulling slightly away from Sigrun to address the crowd. "I don't want anyone to die because of me." The simple courage of it, this broken, abandoned child offering himself as sacrifice, silenced the arguing villagers. Sigrun looked down at Eric's face, pale but determined, and felt a fierce pride battle with her protective instinct. "No," she said firmly. "I found you. I brought you into my home. You are under my protection now, and I will not cast you out." "The decision is not yours alone, Sigrun," Thorsten reminded her, though his tone had softened. "The council must decide what is best for all." "Then let the council meet," she agreed. "But until they decide, the boy stays with me." There was grumbling from some quarters, but Thorsten nodded his assent. "The council will convene immediately. Sigrun, as the one who found the boy, you will be heard." He turned to the gathered villagers. "Return to your homes and prepare. Whether we give up the boy or not, Ulfric comes, and we must be ready." As the crowd dispersed, Sigrun carried Eric back into her cabin, her mind racing. She had won a temporary reprieve, but the real battle lay ahead, convincing the council that one child's life was worth the risk to all of Fjolheim. And beyond that, even if she succeeded, there remained the question of how to face Ulfric's approaching forces. Inside, Leif waited anxiously, relief washing over his young face as they entered. What happened? What did they decide? "The council will meet," Sigrun explained, laying Eric back on the sleeping bench. "They will decide what to do." "About me," Eric murmured, his brief show of courage giving way to exhaustion. "Whether to give me back." Leif looked aghast. "They can't do that. You said he was abandoned. His own people left him to die." "Some believe returning him might prevent Ulfric from attacking us," Sigrun said carefully, not wanting to frighten the boys further, but unwilling to shield them from the truth. "But Father always said a true Viking never abandons those who need protection," Leif protested. "He said it was our highest duty." Sigrun felt a surge of love for her son, who had absorbed not just Olav's strength, but his principles as well. "Yes," she agreed softly, "that is what he believed." "And you?" Eric asked, his blue eyes fixed on her face. "What do you believe?" Before she could answer, a knock came at the door. It was Helga, the grandmother who had been watching Astrid. The old woman entered, leading Sigrun's daughter by the hand. Her weathered face was tight with concern. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "The whole village speaks of nothing else." Astrid broke free of Helga's grip and ran to her mother, burying her face in Sigrun's skirts. "Mother, Petter said they're going to take a boy away and feed him to the wolves," she said, her voice muffled by the fabric. "He said the wolves are coming to eat us all." Sigrun stroked her daughter's hair soothingly. "Petter speaks nonsense, as usual," she assured her. "No one is being fed to wolves." She glanced at Eric, who watched the exchange with wary eyes. "Astrid, this is Eric. He will be staying with us for a time." Astrid peeked at the pale boy from behind her mother's skirts, curiosity overcoming her fear. "Why is he in Leif's bed? Is he sick?" "He was very cold and tired," Sigrun explained, "but he's getting better." Helga moved closer, examining Eric with the practiced eye of one who had seen many winters come and go. "Fever," she pronounced, "and hunger has weakened him considerably." She turned to Sigrun, her voice lowering. The council has already gathered. Torsten sent me to fetch you." Sigrun glanced around at the 3 children, her own too, and this unexpected addition to her household. She couldn't leave them alone, not with the village in such turmoil, and Eric too weak to defend himself if someone decided to take matters into their own hands. As if reading her thoughts, Helga said, "I will stay with them. No one will harm the boy while I am here." A hint of her old fierceness flashed in her faded eyes. "I still swing a mean ladle, and everyone in Fjalheim knows it." Gratitude washed through Sigrun. "Thank you, Helga. I won't forget this." The old woman waved away her thanks. "Go, speak for the boy. Someone must remind those old fools what honor truly means." With a last glance at the children, Leif standing protectively near Eric's bed, Astrid already clambering up to get a better look at their visitor, Sigrun wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped out into the gathering dusk. The walk to the council house seemed longer than usual. Each step weighted with the knowledge that lives hung in the balance of what would be decided there. The winter air bit at her exposed skin, but Sigrun barely noticed, her mind occupied with forming the arguments she would present.
The council house stood at the center of Fjalheim, its timbers blackened by years of smoke from the central hearth. Inside, the village elders had already assembled around the fire pit, their faces grave in the flickering light. Torsten sat in the chief's chair, with Gunnar the blacksmith and Hilda the healer flanking him. Other respected members of the community completed the circle. All conversation ceased as Sigrun entered. She felt their eyes upon her, some sympathetic, others hostile, most simply worried about what her actions might mean for them all. "Sigrun Erikdottir," Torsten intoned formally, "you come before the council to speak for the boy Erik Gormson, whom you found in our forest." Sigrun moved to stand in the open space before the fire, drawing strength from its warmth against the chill that seemed to emanate from some of the council members. "I do," she confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I found him abandoned, half-frozen, left to die by his own people. I brought him to my home as any of you would bring in a wounded animal or a lost child." "But he is not just any child," Hilda pointed out. "He is the son of Gorm, one of Ulfric's most feared warriors. And now Ulfric himself comes with armed men, seeking the boy." "To what end?" Sigrun challenged. "If they abandoned him to die, why would they now come looking for him?" "Perhaps they did not intend for him to die," suggested one of the older men. "Perhaps it was a test of the boy's strength, as some clans practice." Sigrun shook her head firmly. "You did not see his condition, the bruises on his body, the terror in his eyes. This was no test. It was cruelty, pure and simple." "Even so," Torsten said, leaning forward slightly, "we must consider what Ulfric's arrival means for Fjalheim. Our scouts report at least 30 warriors with him, well armed and moving with purpose. We can muster perhaps 20 fighting men, and some of those barely more than boys." The implications hung heavy in the air. If it came to battle, Fjalheim would likely fall. Homes would burn, people would die, all potentially over one small boy from an enemy clan. "I understand the risk," Sigrun acknowledged, "but I ask you to consider what it means if we hand over a child to those who mistreated him, who left him to die. What does that say about who we are? What would our ancestors think of such an act?" Her words struck a chord with some of the council members. The Norse held certain principles sacred, even in times of war. The protection of children, hospitality to those in need, these were foundations of their moral code. Perhaps, ventured Gunnar, stroking his beard thoughtfully, there is a middle path. We could offer Ulfric compensation for the boy, silver, perhaps, or livestock, if it's truly the child they seek. And if it's merely an excuse to attack us regardless, countered another elder, we give up our silver and the boy and still face their swords? The debate continued as darkness fell completely outside. Sigrun stood steady before them, answering questions, making her case with the quiet dignity that had earned her respect even as a widow in a world that valued men's strength above all. As the arguments circled back upon themselves, the door to the council house suddenly burst open. A blast of cold air swept in, along with a figure Sigrun recognized immediately, despite the snow crusting his cloak and beard. Kolbjorn Skaldson, the wandering poet and storyteller, stood in the doorway like a spirit conjured from the storm itself. His gray hair hung in a thin braid down his back, partially covered by the hood of his travel-worn cloak. Around his neck hung a necklace of animal teeth, wolf, bear, and others less easily identified. Most distinctive of all was the runic drum slung across his shoulder, its surface decorated with symbols both ancient and powerful. "Hail, people of Fjalheim!" he greeted them, his deep voice filling the sudden silence. "I see I arrive at an interesting moment." Thorsten rose to his feet, surprise giving way to the formal courtesy due to a skald. "Kolbjorn Wanderer, we did not expect you until spring thaw." The poet stamped snow from his boots and moved toward the fire, his weathered face breaking into a smile that crinkled the corners of his gray eyes. "The best stories are found in winter's heart, when men's souls are laid bare by hardship and cold." He glanced meaningfully around the circle. "And it seems I've stumbled upon quite a tale brewing here." There was an undercurrent of relief in the council's reaction to Kolbjorn's arrival. Skalds were more than mere entertainers in Norse society. They were keepers of history, advisors to chiefs, and sometimes mediators in disputes. Their words carried weight beyond their physical presence. "You come at a difficult time," Thorsten explained, gesturing for Kolbjorn to take an honored place near the fire. "Ulfned Gudmundsson approaches with armed men, and we debate whether returning a boy of his clan might prevent bloodshed." Kolbjorn's gaze fell on Sigrun, standing alone before the council. Something like recognition flickered in his eyes, though they had never met before. "Ah," he said softly, "the widow who chose mercy over fear. I heard whispers of this tale on the road." He turned back to Thorsten. "Tell me more of this situation. Perhaps fresh eyes might see a path others have overlooked." As the council recounted the day's events, Kolbjorn listened intently, occasionally asking a clarifying question, but mostly absorbing the various perspectives with the practiced ear of one who trades in stories. When they had finished, he sat in thoughtful silence for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing the patterns on his drum. "I have traveled far and witnessed much. I have seen clans rise and fall, blood feuds consume generations, and peace forged from the unlikeliest materials." He looked directly at Sigrun. "Tell me of the boy himself, not his clan or his father's reputation, the child as you have come to know him." Sigrun felt a flicker of hope at the skald's interest. "He is brave," she said simply. "Frightened and hurt, yet he offered to sacrifice himself to save strangers who showed him little kindness. He bears a rune tablet carved by his mother before she died, a protection charm any of our own mothers might have made. And your own children? How do they receive this enemy in their midst? Kolbjorn asked. My son Leif stands guard over him even now. My daughter Astrid asks only if he is sick and needs help. Sigrun's voice strengthened with conviction. Children see clearly what we adults often miss, the humanity that binds us all, beyond clan and conflict. Kolbjorn nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Wisdom from the mouths of babes. He turned to address the full council. I have crossed paths with Ulfric Gudmundsson in my travels. He is a man consumed by old hatreds, nursing grievances like precious mead, never allowing them to diminish with time. All the more reason to appease him, suggested one of the elders nervously. Perhaps, Kolbjorn acknowledged, or perhaps there is power in standing firm for what is right, even against overwhelming odds. He began to tap a gentle rhythm on his drum, the sound like distant thunder in the confined space of the council house. Our ancestors faced impossible choices too. Odin sacrificing himself to himself for wisdom. Thor confronting the Midgard serpent, knowing it meant his doom. The rhythm grew more complex, hypnotic, as Kolbjorn continued. What makes a true Viking? Is it merely strength in battle? Or is it the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves? To uphold the sacred laws of hospitality and mercy, even when it costs us dearly? His words hung in the air like the notes from his drum, resonating with ancient truths that ran deeper than present fears. Sigrun felt them touch something within her, a certainty that transcended logic or strategy. I propose this, Kolbjorn said, his rhythm never faltering. Meet Ulfric with honor, but not with the boy as sacrifice. Meet him with truth and the weight of our traditions. If he is still a true Norseman beneath his hatred, he will recognize the greater shame in what his men have done. And if he does not? Torsten asked, voicing the fear that gripped them all. Kolbjorn's hands stilled on the drum. Then you will fight, knowing your cause is just. Better to die with honor than live with the knowledge that you surrendered a child to cruelty. A heavy silence followed his words. Sigrun watched the council members' faces, seeing the internal struggles as they weighed their fear against their deepest values. It was Gunnar who finally broke the silence, his massive blacksmith's hands curling into determined fists. The Skald speaks truth, he declared. We cannot call ourselves Vikings if we abandon our principles at the first threat. I say we stand with the widow and the boy. Others began to nod, courage kindling from Gunnar's spark. Even Hilda, who had been among the most vocal for returning Yerik, seemed swayed by Kolbjorn's words. It is decided then, Torsten announced, rising to his feet. We will meet Ulfric with honor, explain our position, and hope that ancient traditions still hold weight with him. But we will also prepare for battle should words fail. He turned to Sigrun. Return to your home. Keep the boy close. When Ulfric arrives, we will send for you both. Relief and apprehension coursed through Sigrun in equal measure. She had won the council's support, but the true test still lay ahead. As she turned to leave, Kolbjorn rose as well. I will accompany you, he said, slinging his drum across his back. I would meet this brave boy before his fate is decided. Together they stepped out into the night.
The storm had intensified, snow swirling in the darkness like restless spirits. Sigrun pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, grateful for the Skald's tall presence beside her as they made their way through the deepening drifts. "Thank you," she said simply, when they were beyond earshot of the council house. "For your words, for seeing what matters." Kolbjorn glanced down at her, his weathered face thoughtful in the dim light of distant hearth fires. "I merely reminded them of what they already knew. Sometimes we need the mirror of story to see ourselves clearly again. Still, you risked much. If Ulfric attacks despite our stand, many will blame your counsel." The Skald shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "I go where the stories lead me, Sigrun Erikdottir, and yours is one worth witnessing to its end, whatever that may be." They reached her cabin to find all quiet within. Helga sat by the fire, her gnarled hands busy with mending, while the 3 children slept. Leif and Astrid curled on one sleeping bench, Eric still occupying the other, his pale face peaceful in sleep for the first time since Sigrun had found him. "The fever broke," Helga reported in a whisper as they entered. "The boy's stronger than he looks." She eyed Kolbjorn with cautious respect. "So the Wanderer returns. Have you come to help or merely to witness our troubles?" "Both, perhaps," he replied with a slight bow. "The council stands with Sigrun and the boy. We will meet Ulfric with honor rather than fear." Helga nodded approval. "Good. These bones are too old for running anyway." She gathered her mending and rose stiffly. "I'll return at first light."
"There's stew in the pot if hunger finds you." After Helga had gone, Sigrun checked on the sleeping children, tucking furs more securely around them against the night's deepening chill. Kolbjorn settled himself by the fire, his long legs stretched toward the warmth, his drum cradled in his lap. "Rest if you can," he advised Sigrun. "Tomorrow will demand all your strength." But sleep seemed impossible with so much at stake. Instead, Sigrun sat opposite the Skald, watching the fires dance between them. "Tell me a story," she requested suddenly, "something to quiet my thoughts." Kolbjorn's hands began to move across his drum, coaxing forth a gentle rhythm like waves against a shore. "I will tell you of Sigyn," he said, his voice dropping to the mesmerizing cadence of a practiced storyteller. "Wife of Loki, who remained loyal even when all others abandoned him. When the gods bound Loki with his own son's entrails and placed a serpent above him to drip venom on his face, it was Sigyn who stood beside him, catching the venom in a bowl to spare him pain." As he spoke, the story unfolding in images of loyalty and endurance beyond reason, Sigrun felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear giving way to a strange, calm certainty. Through the night, as the wind battered the walls and the children slept on, Kolbjorn's stories continued, each one speaking of courage, sacrifice, and unexpected grace found in the darkest moments. Dawn came gray and subdued, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Sigrun, who had finally dozed off to the rhythm of Kolbjorn's last tale, awakened to find the Skald already up, tending the fire with the quiet efficiency of one accustomed to caring for himself on the road. The children stirred soon after. Eric sat up slowly, his movements cautious but stronger than the day before. When he noticed Kolbjorn, his eyes widened with recognition.
"You're the Skald who visited our clan last autumn," he said, his voice still weak but clearer. "You told the story of Thor's fishing expedition." Kolbjorn smiled, pleased at being remembered. "Indeed I did, young Eric, and now it seems we meet again under stranger circumstances." He studied the boy with kind but assessing eyes. "How fare you this morning?" "Better," Erik admitted. "The widow, Sigrun, she cared for me when no one else would." "Such is the way of true honor," Kolbjorn remarked, glancing at Sigrun with respect. "To recognize our duty to each other beyond the boundaries of clan or kinship." Leif and Astrid watched this exchange with fascination, clearly impressed by the presence of the famous Skald in their home. But the peaceful morning was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. It was Torsten, his face grave with news. "Ulfric's party has been spotted approaching the village boundary," he reported. "We will meet them at the central field. Bring the boy." His eyes moved to Kolbjorn. "Your presence would be welcome as well, Skald. Your words may carry weight where ours do not." After he had gone, Sigrun helped Erik dress in clean clothing borrowed from Leif. Simple but warm garments that would protect him against the morning chill. The boy's movements were surer now, though he still leaned on her for support when they stepped outside into the snow-covered world. "Are you afraid?" he asked her quietly as they made their way toward the meeting place, Kolbjorn walking ahead with Leif and Astrid, who had refused to be left behind. Sigrun considered the question honestly. "Yes," she admitted, "but fear doesn't mean we're making the wrong choice. Sometimes it simply means we understand what's at stake." Erik nodded, his small hand finding hers. "My mother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite it." Sigrun squeezed his fingers gently. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman."
"She was," he said simply, "until fever took her last winter." They reached the central field, where the people of Fjalheim had already gathered. The men stood at the forefront, armed with whatever weapons they possessed, axes, spears, farming implements repurposed for defense. Behind them clustered women, children, and the elderly, faces taut with apprehension. From the opposite direction approached Ulfric's party, warriors on foot, moving with the disciplined formation of men accustomed to battle. At their head strode a figure Sigrun recognized immediately from descriptions. Ulfric Gudmundsson himself, tall and imposing, in a long black woolen cloak, his dark hair pulled back in a severe knot that emphasized the deep scar bisecting the right side of his face. Beside him walked a man Sigrun assumed must be Gorm, Erik's father, similar in build to Ulfric, but with the same pale hair as his son. Erik's grip on her hand tightened painfully as he recognized the approaching men. "Father," he whispered, the single word laden with complex emotions. Torsten stepped forward to meet the visitors, his posture deliberately open, showing neither fear nor aggression. Kolbjorn moved to stand beside him, his presence adding weight to the village's representation. "Ulfric Gudmundsson," Torsten called when the parties were within speaking distance, "you come armed to our village. What is your purpose here?" Ulfric's cold gray eyes swept over the assembled villagers, lingering briefly on Sigrun and the small figure partially hidden behind her skirts. "You know why we come," he replied, his voice as hard as the winter landscape around them. "You harbor something that belongs to us." "If you speak of the boy Erik Gormson," Torsten responded evenly, "then yes, he is here. Found abandoned in our forest, half dead from exposure and mistreatment." A murmur ran through Ulfric's men at this direct accusation. Gorm stepped forward, his face flushing with anger.
"The boy was undergoing a test of strength," he snapped. "A tradition of our clan for generations. You had no right to interfere." "A test?" Sigrun couldn't contain her outrage, stepping forward despite Torsten's warning glance. He was bruised and starving, left alone in winter woods without proper clothing or weapons. What test demands such cruelty to a child?
"Silence, woman," Gorm snarled. "This is not your concern. The boy is my son, and I will deal with him as I see fit." "Not while he is under our protection," Torsten intervened firmly. "In Fjalheim, we do not abandon children to the wolves, regardless of whose children they may be." Ulfric's scarred face twisted in a cold smile. "Noble sentiments, but ultimately meaningless." He gestured to his armed men. "We outnumber your fighting force considerably. You will return the boy, or we will take him, along with whatever else we desire from your village." The threat hung in the air like frost, crystallizing the fear that had gripped Fjalheim since news of Ulfric's approach. Sigrun felt Eirik trembling against her, but when she looked down, she saw not just fear in his eyes, but a steely determination. Before anyone could respond to Ulfric's ultimatum, Kolbjorn stepped into the space between the opposing groups. His tall figure seemed suddenly more imposing, his weathered face grave with purpose. "Ulfric Gudmundsson," he began, his voice carrying the rhythmic quality that marked the beginning of a formal address. "I have sat at your hearth and shared your mead. I have sung the sagas of your ancestors, and witnessed your generosity to those who bring tales and news. Will you now dishonor that hospitality by threatening those who merely upheld the most sacred of our laws, the protection of the vulnerable?" Ulfric's expression flickered with recognition, and perhaps a hint of uncertainty. Skalds were respected throughout the Norse lands, their words capable of immortalizing either glory or shame. To be remembered in song as an oath-breaker or child abandoner was a fate few would willingly court. "This is a matter between clans, Skald," Ulfric replied, though with less certainty than before. "The boy is of our blood. His training and upbringing are our concern alone." "Then perhaps we should hear from the boy himself," Kolbjorn suggested, turning to where Eirik stood beside Sigrun. "Come forward, young one. Speak your truth before both clans." All eyes turned to Eirik. Sigrun felt him stiffen, then slowly straighten his slight frame. With a courage that belied his years and condition, he stepped forward into the open space between the opposing groups. The wooden tablet with its carved rune hung visible at his throat, catching the winter light. "I am Eirik Gormsson," he began, his voice small but clear in the hushed field, "son of Gorm the Strong and Helka the Wise." He turned slightly to face his father directly. "After Mother died, you changed, Father. You said I brought shame to our clan because I preferred songs to swords, healing to hunting." Gorm's face darkened with anger, but Eirik continued undeterred. "You let them take me into the forest. You watched as they beat me and took my warm clothes. You said nothing when they told me wolves would feast on my flesh before morning." His voice broke slightly, but he steadied it with visible effort. "If that is what it means to be of your clan, then I choose another path." A profound silence followed his words. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Sigrun felt a fierce pride swell in her chest at the boy's courage, standing before those who had abandoned him, speaking his truth without flinching. It was then that something unexpected happened. From among Ulfric's party, a woman stepped forward. Older than Sigrun, with silver threading through her dark hair and a face lined by weather and hardship. She moved to stand beside Eirik, placing a protective hand on his thin shoulder. "I am Frida, sister to Helka, who was this boy's mother," she announced. "I have held my tongue too long out of fear." She looked directly at Gorm, her eyes burning with long-suppressed rage.
My sister would curse you from hell's realm if she could see what you have done to her son. This was no clan tradition. It was cruelty born of your bitterness and drink." Murmurs arose from both groups at this public challenge. Ulfric's face darkened with anger at this disruption from within his own ranks, but before he could speak, Frida turned to address him directly. "And you, Ulfric, you who claim to lead with wisdom, you permitted this abomination because Gorm is your shield brother. Where is the honor in that? Where is the strength in tormenting a child?" Her words struck a visible chord among some of Ulfric's warriors, particularly the older ones who might have children of their own. Uncertainty rippled through their previously unified front. Seizing the moment, Kolbjorn began to tap a solemn rhythm on his drum. The sound carried across the field, silencing the murmurs as all turned to the Skald. "I will tell you a story," he began, his voice taking on the mesmerizing cadence that had soothed Sigrun through the night. "Not of battles won or treasures claimed, but of the true wealth of our people. For generations we have survived the cruelest winters and the most merciless seas, not through strength alone, but through our bonds to one another." His rhythm deepened, the sound like a heartbeat in the winter stillness. "When famine struck, we shared what little we had. When storms threatened, we sheltered together. When raiders came, we stood as one against them." His gaze swept both groups, connecting them through his words. "This is the saga of our survival, not the glory of individual warriors, but the strength we find in caring for our weakest members." The drum's pulse seemed to enter Sigrun's very blood as Kolbjorn continued. "Look at this boy, Erik Gormson.
See how he stands before those who harmed him, speaking truth without hate. Is this not the courage we claim to value? Is this not the spirit that carries us through winter's darkest days?" He turned to Ulfric directly. "You come seeking a boy you cast aside. You threaten violence to reclaim what you once discarded. Where is the honor in this, Ulfric Gudmundsson? Where is the wisdom your father was known for?" Throughout this recitation, Sigrun watched Ulfric's face, seeing the conflict that played across his scarred features. For all his reputation for brutality, he was still a Norseman, raised on the same values and stories that bound them all. The Skald's words were finding purchase in that cultural bedrock, undermining the foundation of his anger. When Kolbjorn fell silent, his drum stilling beneath his hands, the quiet that followed seemed to vibrate with possibility. It was Ulfric who finally broke it, his voice rougher than before. "The boy was not meant to die," he said, something almost like defensiveness in his tone. "It was a test, harsh perhaps, but intended to strengthen him." "Then you have your answer," Torsten responded evenly. "He has been tested beyond what any child should endure, and has shown courage that would honor any clan." He gestured to where Eirik stood, small but unbowed. "The question now is not whether he is worthy of your clan, Ulfric, but whether your clan is worthy of him." This inversion, suggesting that it was Ulfric's people who had failed the test, not Eirik, struck home in a way that direct confrontation could not have. The chieftain's gaze moved to the boy, then to Frida, who still stood protectively beside him, and finally to his own men, some of whom now looked distinctly uncomfortable. "My sister entrusted her son to your care," Frida said into the silence, addressing Gorm. "You have broken that trust beyond repair.
I ask that he be released from your authority and placed under mine as his closest living kin."
Gorm's face contorted with anger and perhaps shame. "You overstep, woman. The boy is my son, my blood." "Blood you were willing to spill in the snow," Sigrun interrupted, unable to contain herself. "Blood you abandoned to freeze while you returned to your warm hearth." A low murmur of agreement came from both groups. The universal recognition of a line crossed, a taboo violated. Even in the harsh world of the Norse, even between enemy clans, certain principles remained sacrosanct. Ulfric seemed to sense the shifting mood among his own men. His cold eyes calculated, weighing options, measuring the cost of pressing his advantage against the potential damage to his authority. Finally, he spoke. "The boy has shown spirit," he acknowledged grudgingly. "Perhaps there is merit in what the Skald says." He turned to Frida. "You wish to claim him as your kin?" "I do," she affirmed without hesitation. Ulfric considered this, then nodded slowly. "So be it. Eric Gormson is released to your care." He shot a warning glance at Gorm, silencing whatever protest the man had been about to voice. "We have more pressing concerns than one boy's fate." The tension that had gripped the field began to dissipate, like ice melting under unexpected sun. Sigrun hardly dared believe what she was witnessing, a resolution without bloodshed, a victory of words and ancient values over the threat of violence. Frida knelt before Eric, her weathered hands gentle on his thin shoulders. "You have your mother's courage," she told him softly. "Will you come with me, nephew? I cannot promise an easy life, but you will never again be abandoned or mistreated." Eric hesitated, looking back at Sigrun with uncertainty in his blue eyes. Can I stay here instead?" he asked, his voice small but determined. "With Sigrun and Leif and Astrid?" Frida looked surprised, then thoughtful. She rose and approached Sigrun, studying her with frank assessment. "You have cared for him when his own blood cast him aside," she said. "Would you be willing to continue, to raise him alongside your own?" The question caught Sigrun off guard. She had fought for Eric's safety, for his right to be treated with dignity and care, but she hadn't considered a permanent arrangement. Yet, looking at the boy's hopeful face, at Leif, who had already moved protectively to Eric's side, at little Astrid, who watched with solemn curiosity, she knew there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she said simply, "if that is his wish and yours." Frida nodded, satisfaction evident in her lined face. "Then it is settled. I will visit when I can to ensure he knows his mother's family and history." She glanced at Ulfric, who watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. "With your permission, chieftain." Ulfric gave a curt nod, already turning his attention to Thorsten. "We will depart your territory before nightfall," he stated. "But know this, our dispute with Fjalheim remains unresolved. The matter of Olaf Strongarm's killing of my brother is not forgotten." "That was a fair combat, witnessed by representatives of both clans," Thorsten countered. "Olaf paid with his own life later at the hands of raiders. Surely blood has answered blood." Ulfric's scarred face remained impassive. "We will speak of this another time. For now, consider yourselves fortunate." With that, he turned and began issuing orders to his men, who started to form up for departure. As the tension of immediate conflict ebbed, Sigrun found herself surrounded by her unlikely new family. Leif and Astrid pressing close, Eirik standing slightly apart, until she deliberately drew him into their circle with a gentle hand on his shoulder. Frida watched them with approval before moving to join her departing clan. "You have done a remarkable thing," Kolbjorn said quietly, coming to stand beside Sigrun as they watched Ulfric's party withdraw across the snowy field. "Change the course of many lives with a single act of compassion." "I only did what anyone would do," Sigrun demurred, though she knew this wasn't entirely true. "No," Kolbjorn corrected gently. "You did what everyone should do, but few have the courage for. You saw beyond clan and conflict to our shared humanity." His weathered hand briefly touched her shoulder. "Such choices ripple outward, changing more than we can see in the moment." As they turned back toward the village, the weight of fear lifting with each step, Sigrun felt a strange lightness despite the challenges that surely still lay ahead. Eirik walked between her own children now, life already explaining some game they could play once they returned home. Astrid tugging at the older boy's hand to gain his attention. The village itself seemed transformed in the aftermath of confrontation avoided. People emerging from the tense gathering with relief evident in their faces. Neighbors speaking to one another with the particular warmth that comes from having faced a common threat together. Several nodded respectfully to Sigrun as she passed, acknowledgment of her stand and its vindication. That evening, as snow began to fall again outside, Sigrun's cabin felt warmer than it had in many seasons. The children slept peacefully, Leif and Eirik sharing one sleeping bench, Astrid curled in her usual place. By the hearth, Kolbjorn sat with his drum, occasionally tapping out gentle rhythms as he and Sigrun spoke in low voices. "Will you stay in Fjalheim long?" she asked, finding herself hoping the answer would be yes. The Skald's presence brought a sense of perspective and wisdom that had been lacking in her life since Olaf's death. Kolbjorn smiled, the firelight dancing in his gray eyes. "A while, perhaps, until the worst of winter passes. There are stories here worth gathering, songs waiting to be shaped." His gaze moved to the sleeping children. "And it seems you might need an extra pair of hands with your expanded household." Gratitude washed through Sigrun, for his support during the confrontation, for his offer of continued help, for the simple comfort of adult conversation after long days of solitary responsibility. "Ulfric will return one day," she said, voicing the concern that lingered beneath her relief. Today was a reprieve, not a resolution. "Yes," Kolbjorn agreed, "but when he does, you will not face him alone. You've shown the people of Fjalheim what true strength looks like, not the power to destroy, but the courage to protect." His fingers traced a pattern on his drum, a visual echo of his words. "They will stand with you when that day comes." Sigrun nodded, drawing comfort from the thought. "And until then, we live, we endure, we find joy where we can." "As Vikings have always done," Kolbjorn affirmed, "finding light in the darkest season, warmth in the coldest night." Outside, the wind had died down, the snowfall gentle now rather than threatening. Within the cabin's walls, the fire crackled with comforting familiarity, casting dancing shadows across the sleeping forms of the children, two born of her body, one claimed by her heart, all equally precious. Dawn brought a sky of pale clarity, the storm having swept itself out during the night. Sigrun woke to find Kolbjorn already up, teaching Leif and Eirik the basics of drum rhythms, while Astrid clapped along, her small face alight with delight. The scene struck Sigrun with unexpected force. This makeshift family, finding its way toward something new and hopeful in the aftermath of so much loss.
Later, as the children played outside in the fresh snow under Kolbjorn's watchful eye, Sigrun stood in the doorway of her cabin, watching the village come to life around her.
Smoke rose from hearth fires. People moved between buildings with purpose, the rhythm of daily life reasserting itself after disruption. In the distance, the mountains stood blue-white against the winter sky, eternal witnesses to the brief, fierce dramas of human lives. The widow's journey through that merciless winter had found unexpected refuge, not just in the Skald's words that had helped turn aside conflict, but in the deeper truth those words had awakened in her and those around her. The truth that even in the harshest season, compassion could be the strongest force of all. That night, as Kolbjorn told stories by the fire, weaving tales of gods and heroes for the enthralled children, Sigrun felt the first stirrings of something she had thought lost forever. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The future stretched before them unknown, but no longer empty. A path still covered in snow, but walkable nonetheless. Between the fire and the frost, they had found a third way forward. Together.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.